Good evening. When I was younger, I was fascinated by the show Unsolved Mysteries, hosted by Robert Stack. The show, for those who've never heard of it, was predominantly a crime thriller that used real crimes in its segments. The creators also set up a hotline people could call into, should they have any tips or information regarding anything they saw. In addition to mostly recent crimes, the show also featured segments on the paranormal, aliens, and, as the name implied, an assortment of other mysteries and oddities. Being relatively young at the time, I was taken in by pretty much every segment. All of it seemed so unusual and chilling to me, and few things affected me more powerfully at the time. Since then, I've looked up and rewatched various segments, particularly ones that I deemed favorites, or that I wanted to further understand. One of these segments was of a strange Canadian man by the name of Blair Adams, a construction worker that did international work. According to the segment, Blair's behavior suddenly changed, and he claimed someone was out to kill him. He then made a trek into and through the United States, ending in his death in a place it's believed he had no connection to. What was most puzzling about his death is the partial removing of his clothing and scattered about money and valuables surrounding his body. The segment makes the man's life, and especially his death, seem utterly incomprehensible, with little possibility to be explained. However, through subsequent research, I found much to the contrary. Some made the point that it wasn't uncommon at the time for construction workers to take contract work in other nations. It was also suggested, perhaps speculatively, that Blair simply ended up in the wrong crowd, or got into a scuffle with someone of prominence or capability while in one of these countries, and that he really was a target. Let's not forget that blue-collar crime, while it may not make sense to middle-class Bob, very much makes sense to working-class Joe. It was further noted that the removal of his clothes and the position of his body wasn't actually all that strange. It would seem that people, after a traumatic event such as being hit by a car, have been known to be found dead in a very similar position, such as having removed clothes and arms or other items under the head. This phenomenon was described as one in which the person, while laying there dying, goes through an unconscious action of making their final moments a little more comfortable. These comments and possible explanations also had the occasional disparaging remarks about the show itself, frequently saying that Unsolved Mysteries was known for leaving out critical information and being overly dramatic about simple things. Regardless of what actually happened to Blair, and how many of these speculations are actually true or not, my discoveries took a lot of the intrigue away. This case went from being completely incomprehensible to being much less random and inexplicable, with only a few additional thoughts and facts. Just recently, after watching another segment of the show, I caught the coming up preview of a later segment, that being of a man who lost his divorce case and, allegedly, murdered his wife's attorney. Having been thoroughly acquainted with red pill concepts, this preview lacked the mystery and suspense it wanted to evoke, and simply seemed sad to me. A man, whose life was already ruined, may have completely ended it by thinking his problems were due to an evil attorney and not female nature or the system he was ravaged by. My examples could continue. What I'm trying to get across with all of this is that what fascinated and stirred wonder within me when I was younger is now a lot less peculiar, if not wholly boring and straightforward. I can see this effect in many areas of my life. I was once intrigued and awestruck by film, but after watching over 1,000 movies, and after simply aging a few decades, the magic largely dissipated. What further occurred to me was how the present isn't necessarily especially bad, and that we're all deeply rooted in the time period in which we grew up. If I were to look at the release dates of my top 10 favorite movies, and I did so for this video, I would find that 6 of them were released when I was in my teens. 3 of them were released during the first half of my 20s, and that 1 of them was released before I was born. Looking at other mediums of entertainment would tell a similar story. It was here that I realized much of what we really like are first experiences and exposures to new things, and not necessarily the things themselves. Much of what I feel nostalgic for was objectively worse in many ways in comparison to things that came before or after, and yet I still like them and find a place in my heart for them. This realization seems to offend many, however. I've had some individuals practically go to war with me over the idea that what they personally grew up with wasn't some amazing, special, and perfect thing, instead, merely being what they personally grew up with. They go ballistic when you suggest they'd predominantly like things from another era had they been born just a few years in one direction or the other. Taking this concept even further, the notion that modern movies and entertainment are somehow propagandists also falls flat. The movie Rocky from the 1970s features anti-founding stock themes. How Green Was My Valley from the 40s is all but pro-promiscuity, showcasing a scene in which such a woman is deliberately defended for the behavior. We can also see that even the silent era was little more than such propaganda, with the 1910s film The Immigrant by Charlie Chaplin viciously promoting immigration to the point of breaking laws to see it happen. This trend doesn't stop in the 20th century. It seems obvious to me at this point that Sherlock Holmes was 19th century grindhouse entertainment, and that anything by Jane Austen, now 2 centuries old, was explicit female pornography. I am reminded of similar claims regarding the media, that somehow previous iterations of the news were less biased, when we in fact see, as has been delved into by others, that certain periods were actually worse than things are today, and that no times were good times. It was simply a matter of how bad they were and in what specific ways. The only good times are little more than the times you personally can take refuge in. What's left, once one realizes the pleasure of life was based on how novel it was, and that this novelty may have even been repugnant? Not much, it seems. If you don't have adult addictions, and I largely don't have an interest in either slaving away or enslaving others at some job, and I largely don't have enough wealth to enjoy the bounties of the global stage, and I, once again, largely don't, then there's really not a whole lot left. At least personally, I simply upkeep and expand my few remaining personal endeavors, such as my intellectualism and my collections. And that's about it. Not that these things are trivial to me. In fact, I've dedicated my life to them at great cost. But to only possess a few things of value in life is very drudging, especially when they're so encumbering. This doesn't seem to be a new phenomenon, however, although I have little concept as to how it may have played out centuries ago. W. E. Barton is quoted as having said in 1921, "Many men die a good many years before the undertaker carts take them away." Others around the same time period have said similar things, about dying and not being buried until a later date. Seeing as how so many in the 20th century had the same thought, perhaps the fact that so many people began to live, and live for so long, has something to do with this. No longer was it common to die in childbirth, or of plague or war. The immense ease of living in comparison to previous centuries surely also played a related role, in why so many simply die while still needing to live. With this thought, it's easy to say that we would have been the ones to have died in birth, or of plague, or in war. But I wonder how many of us who have died without dying would have remained alive had the billions of others on this planet never been, let alone for so long, or having found success in that life.